We're inclined the latter to higher consciousness. And that is accomplished by balancing the left brain hemisphere, represented by the solar symbol, the sun, that's the pillar of Joachim, and the lunar feminine consciousness, which needs to be integrated to provide that balance or synthesis, the union of opposites, ordo apteo. Okay? So when one does that, they transcend duality, and they reach the middle pillar, which is called Jacob's ladder. The right-hand pillar is called the pillar of Boaz, the lunar pillar. When you transcend duality, seeing the world as us versus them, then you can climb that middle pillar, and not a moment until. That's when you're granted access to the ladder to climb to the middle pillar. You see here, the imperfect ashlar and the perfect ashlar. But one can only make that bridge between the two, from the imperfect to the perfect, by centering oneself, by coming to a place of balance. And at the top of that ionic pillar, the one on the left is Doric, the one on the right is Corinthian, okay, is the all-seeing eye. Because the ion pillar has been climbed. The ionic pillar. This is occult wordplay, which we're going to see in a little bit. The key represents the heart chakra. And there's the color green. That's why that is the green initiate. That has the key. That's the key to everything, is care. True care. The opening of the heart chakra. Nothing can be accomplished without it. And you're certainly not going to be granted access to the Stargate because you will not have the key to go through the Stargate. Which was phenomenal symbolism that Farrell brought up earlier. I can't tell you how impressed I was by that.
It's awesome.
And as Freeman alluded to, this is connected with the Kabbalistic tradition, the positive Kabbalistic tradition, which is also about three pillars or paths which need to be unified to reach the crown chakra, or Keter as it is known as on the Kabbalistic tree of life. So, that floor of the house is base consciousness, total unawareness of one's own divine nature. Okay? A wanderer. Okay? See, there's the brain balance that I'm bringing up. The left brain, the right brain, and the Temple of Solomon. The sun and the moon is what Solomon actually translates to. And when we put them together, we reach the all-seeing eye, or the state of spiritual balance. It's called the chemical wedding, the divine union. So that floor of the house represents unconsciousness. Let's look at how that's used. It's wrapped again around the brain of the police. Wrapped around their brain. They're telling them, in a mocking way, you don't see anything. You don't know what light is. You don't know what darkness is. You don't know what good is. You don't know what evil is. You don't know right from wrong. You're a complete wanderer in desolation on the floor of the house. Totally unconscious. And they're telling them that their brain is in a state of that kind of imbalance, in disarray. And they put the other symbols on the third eye chakra. The hypercube is one of the most occulted symbols in all of occultism. And you don't reach the understanding of the hypercube unless you're initiated into some tradition. Okay? It's very difficult to even get information about this symbolism unless you actually belong to some form of an occult institution. The hypercube represents a prison. This is prison symbolism. Okay? The inner cube represents the spiritual or divine nature. And it is imprisoned in the physical world. Now that's a worldview. Okay? This is what this worldview is attached to this symbol in dark occultism. I'm not saying that the entire physical universe is a prison. I'm telling you that that's how dark occultists use this symbol. Okay, so this is everywhere, actually, the hypercube. In my research for doing this presentation, I found it everywhere. And there were many examples, so this will be a little bit of a longer section. This represents dimensions or densities. 0D is the point. We extrude the point for 1D, we get a line. We extrude the line, we get 2 dimensions. We extrude the plane, and we get 3-dimensional space. But then, what happens if we try to extrude a cube? Well, this is what the extrusion of a cube looks like, depicted in a 2-dimensional projection. And that's another way of looking at the hypercube. Okay? That's 4-dimensional space-time. Okay? This is what the hypercube looks like if you visualize it in 3 dimensions. is not just only used in a dark occultic way, however. Okay? But I'm just explaining, this is the mindset that dark occultists see and use this symbolism in. Alright? There's the 3D model and the 2D projection, which looks like an octagon in the 2D projection of the 4D hypercube. Where do we see the octagon? Again, on top of the crown chakra now. They attack the third eye chakra with satanic symbolism, and now with more dark occult symbolism, a black octagon on the crown chakra. There it is. When are these individuals going to wake up and stop thinking in terms of dualism as us versus them? I wonder, I ask that question. Now, another way of looking at the hypercube is two squares. And this is also, it's difficult to find accurate information about this unless you are going into some form of occult school and learning it from themselves to see how they view this symbolism. So here we see the two squares on the Sussex Police logo. This is another way of depicting the hypercube or the octagon. There it is, in the intersection between the two squares. Now, I'm quoting from David Icke from his book, The Biggest Secret. The double square, one square on top of another in any form, is more secret society symbolism. In the secret language of symbolism, one square on top of another means control of all that is right, all that is wrong, all that is just, all that is unjust, all that is positive, all that is negative. In other words, we control everything. And I got news for you. That does not mean the police control everything. The occultists who crafted this symbolism for the use by the police are telling the police that we control everything, including you. And where do we see the double square? On the third eye chakra once again. There's the octagon, combined with the floor of the house. There it is again. Once you start to see it, it's everywhere. There it is again. So you have to, and there it is combined with the floor of the house again. Mocking these people brutally, wordlessly, because they know nothing of occult symbolism. Hell, they know they've barely read a book in their lives, let alone understand anything about the occult. And I'm sorry to say that, but it just happens to be the case. You know? No study of self, which is the only thing, knowledge really worth having. Here we see in the second commando unit, the double square again, very clearly seen there. Here is an octagonal patch of U.S. Army forces. Okay, right in the center of the hypercube or octagon. Again, returning to that Medal of Valor, which I said is one of the most vile symbols out there with the inverted pentagram, here we see two examples of the hypercube. There's the double square right there, and there is the octagon. I won't even go into what trapezoidal symbolism represents. That's the ultimate shape of Satanism. The stop sign on every street corner is saying, stop. Keep existing in the prison at every street corner that we come into, at every intersection, at every crossroads. The octagon. Cage fighting. One of those male-dominator behaviors that damages the brain. The symbol is the octagon. Fort Knox, surrounded by the hypercube or octagon, where the gold is imprisoned, because it's the same as the imprisoning of alchemical gold, the third eye. See, what happens in the spiritual is reflected in the physical. Not that that gold does.